Hey friends, I hope you all have had a good week. I am checking in now with everything that I have read in the last week. I want to talk a little bit about things I've been studying and thinking about. It's been a pretty chill week. I haven't done anything like really spectacular. I did go and have breakfast with my daughter-in-law and my 3 grandkids. I have 2 grandsons who are 2.5 and 18 months, and then I have a granddaughter who is 3 months. And so I went over and visited with them, had breakfast, and it was a really good morning. My son was home for the morning. He's a police officer and he doesn't start till the afternoon. So got to have breakfast with everybody. That was really fun. That was kind of probably the highlight of my week. Other than that, I've mostly just been staying home and hanging out. I do have some travel plans though. This coming weekend, like this coming Friday, I am taking my youngest daughter to a ministry camp. It's in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is about 3.5 hours from where I am here in Arkansas. And it's kind of a historic town. Like, you guys can look it up online and see lots of cool stuff, but it was a major vacation retreat for a lot of society in the earlier 20th century, and lots of celebrities have been there, and it's a whole thing. It's like one of the nation's spa resorts. And now, you know, it's not so much a spa resort anymore, but still a really beautiful place to go and visit. It's not very big. It's not very, you know, heavily populated. But my daughter is going to a ministry camp up there. She's really interested in missions, and so she's going to go have this little couple of days of hearing from people, you know, in ministry and in missions. So I'm taking her and I'm going to stay in a historic hotel up there. So I thought I would take some video and show you guys what it looks like in Hot Springs and talk a little bit about the history there. I don't think I'll do a whole lot of shopping, like book shopping or whatever, maybe a little bit on Friday, but the rest of the time I'm just gonna kind of, you know, walk around and look at stuff and sit around and read and just chill. So I'll give you guys some video from Hot Springs, and then the following weekend I'm taking my second oldest daughter to Austin, Texas for a convention her and her friend want to go to. And so I'm probably going to hit some bookshops there. They're going to be in this convention all day on a Sunday, and so I'll be looking for stuff to do. So I'll probably see if there's any bookshops close by. I've never really hung out in Austin. I've been to things like on the outskirts and driven through, but this is like downtown, so I'm not sure how much running around I will do, or maybe I'll just set off on foot. I don't know. But anyway, I'll give you guys some video and you guys can travel a little bit with me on those days. Otherwise, I am just home dinging around until then. All right, but anyway, let's get into the stuff that I've been reading. So the first thing that I finished was Munster Village by Mary Hamilton. This book was published in 1778. If you were watching a couple of weeks ago, I talked about this book called The Mothers of the Novel, and it features 100 women who wrote before Jane Austen. And so this was one of them, Mary Hamilton. I had never heard of her before, or knew anything about her. I still really don't know anything about her. I haven't taken the time to really study about her, but I will say, on my last reading check-in, I talked about Elizabeth Inchbald's book, A Simple Story, and I was kind of annoyed with it. I did not super love it. I felt like the writing was extremely sensational and the story was just not really, there wasn't much to it. I did not enjoy it. This story, on the other hand, it annoyed me in a different way, but it was really well written, I have to say. The style of it didn't really appeal to me. I'll get into all this in a second. The style didn't appeal to me, but I have to give it credit for being well written. The woman who wrote this was obviously educated. She was obviously well read and, you know, had a great vocabulary and used her vocabulary well, and I didn't feel like this book needed an editor. However, who's to say that someone didn't actually edit this before publishing it in this version? The other one was an Oxford World Classic Edition, and they don't do a lot of heavily editing and modernizing in those books, and that's fine. But this one either was heavily edited and modernized, or this is a much better writer, in my opinion. Anyway, it was a better reading experience for sure. I'll have to get a hold of the copy of A Simple Story that this publisher has put out and see if they have edited it a lot. But this book tells the story of a woman who creates kind of like an academic utopia. So you have to read about like her ancestry and how she comes into her money and all this stuff. But once you finally get to there, she uses her money to build just like this huge academic retreat. Like it's like a school, but I don't think it's, it's funded by her, and both men and women can come. And the women are learning things on a broad spectrum, right? All kinds of different subjects. It talks about those subjects in detail and what the women are getting out of it and why they're important. The one thing about this book is it's not very long, but it is full of like sermonizing. Not necessarily religious sermonizing, but just lots of just homilies, right? The woman goes off on a lot of different subjects. Individualized education, access to art, fairness in commerce, efficiency in farming practices. Like, she's got some pretty tedious sermons on pretty much everything. But they're well written. You see this a lot in writing from the 18th and 19th centuries, where a woman is writing and she kind of goes off on these little things. She inserts her opinions, she inserts stuff, right? And she does that because that's her voice. That's her opportunity to have a voice somewhere. There wasn't a lot of times that a woman could just stand up in a crowd and start speaking her mind, right? Without being mocked and pulled down, and she could even get up on a platform in the first place. And so you can see that, you can pick that out of women's writing a lot when they're trying to make a social commentary point. This one is just jam-packed. Like, there's no hiding it. It's literally like every rant this woman had about all kinds of different subjects put into a pretty well-written little book and spoken from the point of someone with a good education. And so all that to say, it kind of makes her idea of this feminine educational utopia kind of a, believable point, because she's showing the effects, the benefits, and the outcome of a feminine academic education. She references so much history, allusion to mythology, and just so many things that she would have studied with a classical education, that she makes a valid point here. And one of the things that I really like about this book too, and I agree with her on, is the importance of individualized education. She's talking about how education should be suited to, designed for, geared towards a person's aptitudes and interests. And I agree with that. And that's one of the big reasons why I've homeschooled all these years, because each of my children has a completely different avenue they want to go down, right, than the sibling before or after them. And so having this opportunity to give them an education that is geared directly to their interests and aptitudes, and to provide the resources they need to grow in those different directions, that's going to allow the whole world to open up to them, right? I feel like that sets them up to look at the great big world and all that's available, and then choose the things that are interesting to them, that they feel that they're good at, that they feel like they could really make a go at, and then be kind of empowered, right, to go towards that, because that's what we're kind of already doing here at home. At one point in the story, she is describing this woman who was pursuing her talent of painting, and she says she had too much good sense to be ashamed of employing those talents bestowed on her by nature for so natural a purpose. Like, why should she be ashamed of practicing this thing that she's naturally gifted at? Like, use it, right? You were gifted those talents and abilities for a reason. So I loved that. She makes a lot of really great points in this book. It's really like, I don't know, I could be exaggerating, but I want to say it's like 20% story and 80% her social commentary. One thing that I did notice that was interesting was there was a point at which the terms pride and prejudice were juxtaposed, and it says, prejudice might object to it perhaps, but that shall never enslave my understanding, especially as it must be founded only in pride. And there are a couple other books, I can't remember, I think it's either Frances Burney or Maria Edgeworth. I think it's Frances Burney that used the term Pride and Prejudice. And one other author uses the term Pride and Prejudice. All three of these women before Jane Austen used it in the title of her book. So it seems that the terms Pride and Prejudice were terms that were used against each other, right? To make a point in just regular speech. So is it something that started with one of these authors and everybody read it and liked it and kept using it? Or is it just a term that, was in part of everyday speech? Like, for instance, where we say you're comparing apples and oranges. Like, we say that, right? That's a term. Just things like that. So I'm very curious. So, maybe I'll keep just like a central list of all the times that I come across something like that. Anyway, that's Munster Village. I think it would have probably been really inspiring to women at that time. I think about like if I was living during that time and I read a book like this, if my husband was the same kind of guy then as he is now, he would be encouraging me. He'd be like, yes, preach it, woman. Keep going, keep learning, keep exploring, keep expanding your mind. I wouldn't have had one of those husbands that, would cause me to have to read this in the water closet or whatever. So anyway, yeah, good story. I gave it 3 stars, but like I said, if I would have been living in that era, it would have been a 5-star read for sure. All right, and then next I read On the Way Home by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And this is a story of the trip that Laura, Almanzo, and Rose, about 7 years old, their daughter, they took from South Dakota to Mansfield, Missouri. So Mansfield, Missouri is the last place that Laura and Almanzo lived. It's just a few hours up the road from me. I think I told you guys about Wilder Days that they have up there in September. And so it was fun to read this and see some of the photographs, because some of the photographs, when they get into Mansfield, are places that I have actually been. Like, for instance, this is a picture of a parade in Mansfield, Missouri in 1894, probably taken on Memorial Day or 4th of July, it says. Well, I went to a parade in Mansfield, Missouri on the day I went there, and it was a parade honoring Laura Ingalls Wilder. And so that was really fun to see that. This is a picture of the house up at Mansfield. And my mom and I sat out on the lawn in front of this house and listened to a guy play Pa's fiddle and had barbecue with a whole bunch of other people who were there enjoying the day. So that was fun to see that. This is a view of their land at the time, and if I am correct, I believe that this area is now a parking lot where you park to go and visit, right? Not as far back as the tree line, but here in the foreground parking lot for, visitors to the museum and stuff. I did enjoy reading this. I gave it 4 stars. The reason I took 1 star off was Laura could just be kind of harsh, and it was a bummer, I guess, just to read. Kind of her tone sometimes. She's kind of a grumpy, negative person sometimes. And that was a bummer, right? Because in the Little House books, everything seems so happy and joyful and, just beautiful and bright. And I had made a comment about her reminding me of Ma, and how Ma sometimes seems so harsh and negative and even cruel in the Little House books. And others who read that comment did not agree with me, which is totally fine. But I did kind of get that vibe from Ma in the book. She just seemed so negative most of the time. I mean, obviously loving, just kind of, I don't know. She's always picking on the Indians. And the one time when Ma made Mary and Laura give their beads that they had found, their Indian beads, to baby Carrie to play with, like, baby Carrie didn't even care. Baby Carrie would have played with anything. She was a baby. Anyway, for the most part, I enjoyed those diary entries that Laura made in that book. Oh, one quote that she gave about the Ozarks, I loved this because I live in the Ozarks as well. And she says, "It is a drowsy country that makes you feel wide awake and alive, but somehow contented." It's like, yeah, that is how it is. Everything's just a little bit slower here, but not without purpose. it's not slower because we don't do as much. It's slower because we do things slower. And we think about it, right? Sometimes you just think about what you're doing. We don't plow through life quite as quickly here as we did when we lived out in Oregon. But okay, and then after I read that, then I read West from Home, which is a collection of Laura's letters home to Almanzo when she went out to visit their now grown daughter, Rose. She wrote these in 1915. She had gone to San Francisco and she's visiting Rose there. She gets to sort of see a little bit of the outlying area as well, but for the most part, she's hanging out in San Francisco. And the thing that's really cool about this book and this collection of letters is we get to see Laura's early writing, her early thoughts about writing, like her getting into writing professionally. One of the reasons why she has gone out there to see Rose is because Rose is kind of coaching her in how to write for magazines, how to write for publications. Not necessarily on how to write, but how to write in a style that is publishable during this time, right? Because that's what Rose did, right? She was primarily a journalist, and so she was kind of teaching her mom the ropes and getting her gigs, right? She got her some opportunities to write some articles for papers back home in Missouri. And so Laura is just writing home to Almanzo, talking about kind of her dreams of writing and maybe putting more stories together or whatever. And so this is long before she had written the Little House books, long before she had published anything, in that we see a novel form or whatever. And so that writing process is really fun to watch it kind of develop. And the other thing that I really loved about it is she's like 48 years old. I'm 45 years old, which means there's still hope for a writing career ahead of me. Yay. But anyway, it was really fun to read this. And then it all took place during the time of the World's Fair. So there's a World's Fair going on there in San Francisco. And I just love reading anything about a World's Fair. That's something that has always fascinated me. And so that was really fun to read too. It was fun to read about Laura going to the fair and I think it was scones or biscuits. Anyway, something that we would consider biscuity here in the US that she was just kind of indulging in. And at one point, Rose writes home to Almanzo and she's like, "Father, I have to tell you something about Mother. I know this is hard to hear, but you really have to know. Mother is getting extremely fat." She talks about how she's just been indulging in all of these, pastries or whatever at the fair, and that he just needs to be aware and understanding, and they need an intervention, basically, is what she's saying. So I thought that was really funny. Here's a picture of Laura a couple years after her stay there. And the photographs are just fun. Here's one of the World's Fair. I like the way that she describes settings to Almanzo. I feel like she was kind of practicing writing settings as she was describing the scenery to him. And it pays off, right? Because that's one of the things that we love about the Little House books is the descriptions of the settings there. She documents history. At one point she says that eggs are 50 cents a dozen. So they're a year into World War I, and I was looking at one of those inflation calculators. 50 cents a dozen is about $16 now. So $16 for a dozen eggs. I don't know about you and where you're at, but here in the Ozarks, we have been having really high prices on eggs, like $4, $5, $6, $7 a dozen even. But it has not yet got up to $16. So not that I really think we should stop complaining about egg prices, but maybe we can just be thankful that we're not there yet. All right, and then finally, just last night, I finished A Separate Piece by John Knowles. I read this because it is on my summer school list that I made for myself. It was one of 2 torture books that I decided to indulge in. So when I was putting together this, DIY summer school thing, I was thinking about things that I had never finished in high school. Do you ever have those dreams where you're like, oh, there's these unfinished things, right? And you got to go back to school to finish some ridiculous class to get your diploma so it's valid? Anybody? Okay, I have those dreams. And so one of the things that I always think about are these two books that I hated and we had to read all the time. And that is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck and A Separate Peace by John Knowles. And repeatedly I was assigned these books. Like I was probably assigned Mice and Men like 3 or 4 times, and I was assigned A Separate Peace at least twice between the 7th grade and the 12th grade. Now, I grew up in a town of 10,000 people, and the schools were only a few blocks away, and surely the teachers could have come into some kind of a collaboration and talked about what books they're not going to repeat, because there are billions of books out there, and we could have had a much more well-rounded education had we not had to read these same books repeatedly. These are 2 books I did not enjoy at all, and didn't even really remember what they were about. I can remember the discussions going way over my head. I can just remember hating them, and I wasn't the only one. So doing a little research when I was creating this summer school plan for myself, I found that these books are still being assigned now. And I'm like, okay, these were old vintagey books when I was in school. Why are they still relevant? So I've already done Mice and Men. I've already talked about that. I've already talked about how much I still hate it and its limited relevancy to today. Now we'll talk about A Separate Peace. So A Separate Peace tells the story of a all-boys prep school in New England during the time of World War II. None of that is relatable. It's not relatable to me now, and it wasn't relatable to me in 1994 or 5 or whenever. The story centralizes around 2 friends who, one of them, Phineas, you really don't ever get inside his head. His whole story is told from the perspective of the other one, Jean. You get inside Jean's head, and you get inside what Jean sees Phineas as. On one hand, Jean holds Phineas up to be like this greater-than-life, superhuman, almost godlike being who can't possibly have a negative, mean, horrible thought about someone, always has the best of intentions, great at everything, liked by everyone. On the flip side, you also see Jean's kind of maybe subconscious hatred towards Phineas, maybe jealousies or whatever's that he just doesn't fully develop, and just his intense dislike for Phineas. So at one point there's an accident, and Phineas changes Phineas's life forever. And so the rest of the story kind of revolves around the fact, was the accident purposeful? Was the accident really an accident? And that's supposed to be kind of the psychological question of this story. You never actually find out. You just make your own assumption and come to your own conclusion. If the accident is accidental, it puts Jean and Phineas's characters, personalities, and stories in one light. And if it is not, it puts them in a different light, right? So depending on how you feel about the accident, or on purpose accident, determines how you feel about Jean and Phineas. Does that make sense? Okay. So in that case, fine. That's an interesting, philosophical, psychological topic. Just the setting of it. I mean, it's all boys. Like, the only woman that shows up in this story is a girl that they're making a snow sculpture fantasizing about, and somebody's mom. She's not like a regular character. She just shows up in a scene. So there are no female characters. It's a boys' book, and that's fine. So, I am looking at this from the perspective of, somebody who's old enough to be their mom and a girl. So it's not really relatable at all. I don't have any this or that sort of feelings for it. The only part that really made me sort of get really fired up about it is at the end of the story, they have put a modern day sort of end notes written by a guy. And in it, he is basically reevaluating the story for the 21st century. He talks about how there are all these undertones of homoerotic passion between Jean and Phineas. And he even talks about how someone asked the author, John Knowles, if he meant this to be a homoerotic story. And John Knowles is like, no, if I was going to write that kind of story, there would be quite a bit about Phineas and Jean that would be very different in this story. That's not my intention. That's not what this story is about. It's about friendship. It's about loyalty. It's about coming of age. It's about loss of innocence, emotionally, intellectually. And, no, you don't have to take your mind there, right? That's not what I'm trying to write about. So the author of this 21st century afterword that they've added onto this edition, he, concedes that point and then goes in for pages, which I did not read all of and ended up ripping out and throwing away, but goes in to explain all the reasons why this is a great book for people who have a homoerotic bent and why, we should actually interpret it as their, stifled passion for one another and all this stuff. And it just really brought up Lucy Worsley vibes. It's one of those things where if this makes you think this and makes you go this way and this is what you got out of the story, great, that's your own business, that's your own whatever. No matter what the topic is, right? But to try to actually rewrite reality is a completely different story. I bring up Lucy Worsley because I feel like she did that in her biographies of Jane Austen and Agatha Christie. Both, they really rub me the wrong way. I did not like how she tried to make them into 21st century minded feminists. Her evidence was either misunderstood or misconstrued. Hard to tell one or the other, but it really bugged me and it made me not like her, made me not want to read anything else by her because that's not okay. We cannot change, what they meant, especially if they flat out tell you what they meant. Jane Austen and Agatha Christie told us who they were. We have no right going in and changing their biographies, right? And the same thing here. John Knowles flat out told you with his mouth, no, that's not what the story's about. Yet this commentator needs to make it all, 21st century relevant and insert all these things that the author really meant and this guy knows better. Like, that sort of mentality bugs me really bad. Not just because it's about, homoeroticism, which I'm not into, just in general. Like, don't do that. Be educated and intelligent enough to say, this is what the author said, this is what the author meant. This is how I felt about it, then you can go all that whatever direction you went, right? But if you try to explain to, someone what they actually mean and what they actually think, you just end up looking foolish. I'll probably keep the story. It is a classic and maybe somebody in my life will want to read it. So I'll keep it in my library, but I highly doubt I'll read it again. But I did get it checked off of my DIY summer school, so yay for that. All right, and then some other stuff that I've been doing kind of reading-wise. Yesterday I spent a lot of time reading in my Daphne's Diary art magazine. This is another thing that I had on my summer school list, just for the artsy, calm coziness of it all. I have a bunch of these magazines. They're just full of arty things. Papers. This is a article about going and visiting Luxembourg. This is a little poem and recipes and like art pages and things. Oh, see, I turned to one right there. Just all kinds of fun little artsy inserts and cute scrapbooky paper and stuff. And my husband buys these for me a lot as, just gifts or just whatever. And I don't go through them as quickly as he buys them for me. So that was one of the things that I was wanting to do this summer, was to at least go through this one. And so yesterday I spent some time doing that. I'm only like maybe a fourth of the way through, but I'm going really slowly and in the Ozark way. So I read some of her thoughts about chilling out and telling yourself you're not wasting time by relaxing. There's still plenty of time for the other things you need to do. I read an article about some salads that she made and had like a salad lunch with friends, which sounds so fun. I wish I had some friends to have a solid lunch with. And then, let's see. And then she's got this poem here that she wrote about her son. She's got some natural helps for allergies. And then she's got the article about Luxembourg. And lots of photos. Some more recipes. This article about this artist and this beautiful painting and sketching art that she does. And then I came across these little art cards. They're kind of on the back, they're sort of like postcards, but they're large and too flimsy to actually send as a postcard. That one's not beautiful. And so I actually just wrote a letter on the back of them for a new pen pal that I have from Canada. Now, that reminds me, if you guys want to write letters, my address is in the description box. So if you want to write me a letter and you're a woman, I will write you back. I don't write to guys, but I will write you back if you're a lady. So I would love to be pen pals with anyone who wants to be. Feel free to write me a letter. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to show you guys is my game board for the end of summer jam that I'm doing. I found it on Kelly's channel, on Bookish Kelly, and then there's several other co-hosts that I'm now subscribed to, but I haven't watched as much as I've watched Kelly. So you guys can check that. I'll put that link down there for you guys to check out. But they are doing the end of summer jam mood readathon. And we just read whatever we want to read, and then there's these questions. And for each of the books that you read, you answer a question. So like the first book you read, you got to answer number 1. Second book you read, you got to answer number 2. And I'm assuming that we can kind of like fulfill these prompts in our own way. I'm going to just make a video at the end of August and talk about the books I read, and then, you know, I'll use one prompt for each book in order. You got to go in order. So like book number 1 goes with prompt number 1. You know what I mean? Okay, so I will do that all in a video at the end of, hold on, I got a text. Okay. I will do all of that at the end of the month. Okay, but anyway, so here are my stickers. So the first one, this one represents Emma M. Lyon, because that is the first book that I actually finished in August, even though I talked about that on my last check-in video. This one represents the Munster Village, because it's like a little open book, right? And like the background, whatever, is kind of a little, well, it's really just a log cabin in the woods, but you know. So anyway, that's from Munster Village. And then this one is a basket of apples, because in the diary where Laura and Almanzo are coming to Mansfield, they do talk about trading stuff to get some apples. And then here is a suitcase, because Laura went out on the train to visit Rose in San Francisco. And then this one is actually like brownstone buildings in a city. But I was looking for something that looked kind of dark academia and kind of like a schoolish, and because that's where a separate piece takes place, right? So we're gonna pretend this is kind of like, other than the doorways, for the most part, this is kind of like some of the buildings that my university looked like when I went to university in Eastern Oregon. But that's that. So there's my wrap up. Hope everybody's having a great week. Thank you for stopping by and watching this extra long video. I will see you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.